Okay, so hi, my name is Sitapriya Moorthi. You can call me Sita. And as Steph mentioned, I did the OpenScapes program in 2023 when I was a part of the Berger Lab at Fred Hutch as a postdoc, really starting to do computational work on a genomics project. And so I'm going to spend some time reflecting on like what I learned and how this transformed in a lot of ways how I think I now do better science, but that's just my personal opinion. And just wanted to spend a minute on the land acknowledgements from the Fred Hutch side. And I wanted to start with giving like a brief introduction about who I am. And hopefully, this background resonates with some of you or some parts of your career and makes me more relatable and my examples more relatable. Um, so I started my career as a quintessential wet lab scientist, and this meant I was working in the field of cancer biology, spent a lot of time at the bench doing cell culture, molecular assays, cellular assays, you name it, and I've probably done it. And this world I felt was defined a lot by protocols and practices and very rigid way of doing things, and for good reason. And then I transitioned to a postdoc here at the Hutch, and I've worked with Alice Berger, Gavin Ha, Amy Pigirigan, and I started to identify as more of a dry lab scientist. I was working in cancer genomics projects. That meant working with both patient and research data, doing a lot of data analysis and bioinformatics work. And very honestly, this world to me seemed less structured. But another way of looking at it was there were many right ways to do things. And that was kind of unnerving in a lot of ways because I'd come from this world where things were very specific and defined and how you do an experiment. And now I work with the Office of the Chief Data Officer as a staff scientist, kind of building on those two world experiences. And here I do a lot of data science, both research and otherwise, and also help and provide support to the larger Fred Hutch research community. We do things like build tools for scientists and facilitate collaborations. And this world is really centered around building reproducible systems and working on a lot of the foundations, which we're going to learn about through the program. And this is kind of an honest truth moment. I had some misconceptions about what open science meant before going through this program. I think one of the misconceptions I had that open science meant that everything I did, my data, the workflows, the documents, they had to be shared across the world. I also had this thinking that open science was only meant for people who coded. It wasn't a world where me in this transitionary phase had the capacity to do. And I also had this idea that it was very complicated and very time consuming and not worth the effort. And boy, I was wrong in a lot of these, and a lot of these misconceptions went away as I did the program. So I'm going to talk about three big key takeaways that for me personally was really, really important from this program. The idea of taking stock, collaborative upskilling, and reproducibility. And I know a lot of you have shared so far about how important reproducibility is and that you recognize how important that is. I'm also going to give you examples, and I made them into these three levels, talking about how this really benefited me at a personal level in my own work, how it potentially benefited my group, the team I was working with, collaborators, and potentially how I could spread the word around the world and potentially was helpful to people who don't know me. I don't want to make this whole presentation about me talking, even though it might seem like that. And so have these fun interaction prompts. So I would encourage you to go to the section and write your thoughts as we go along whenever you see one of those prompts. So this first takeaway about taking stock, what does that mean? I think the exercise is to identify what you have and what you need. And it seems very simplistic, um, but we don't do it often enough. Being deliberate about it, taking the time to consciously write down what is that we have and what do we need or what we need to develop. And writing it down seems a given, but a lot of times these thoughts linger in our head and don't really get into action because we don't have something to look at and say, oh, we need to build this. So I really felt it was a very undervalued exercise. And it's interesting because in the wet lab world, we do stock taking at so many different levels so often. And I found that that may not be the cultural norm in the dry lab world. And so to me, that was a big takeaway from this process. Um, we talked about the OpenScapes pathway and an exercise that you as a group will be working towards. And this is a snapshot of the OpenScapes pathway we wrote as a team at the Berger Lab. This is in no way an ideal example, but I think what it's emblematic of is that we took the time for the first time to sit and write down everything we have and how we do things in the lab. And to me, that was just in itself a very great exercise. So how did this help me very, very specifically? I think in this process of taking stock, I recognized that I didn't really have a system in place for the code I was writing. And this really pivoted into me creating repos for some of the data analysis that I was helping with in the lab. And potentially created a culture in the lab of building such kind of repositories for the future of data analysis in the lab. As a group, I think we recognized we didn't have a system on defining where different types of data should go. So not everything has to be a big coding problem, but just this simple act of being like, oh, if we have this big data file that we're probably only going to use once, should we keep it in a temporary storage location like Scratch at the time or temp? And then have a copy of it in S3? Is that a more cost-effective strategy for the lab? And so we kind of developed a protocol for that. And the third thing we realized was that we didn't have a system in place for sharing our data when publication time was upon us. Did we achieve a system in place? We didn't, but the point was we had the time to recognize the gaps in our group and realize that when we do reach a point where we need to address them, we have them written down, like I said. So I would love for you all to think about and take a moment to write down ways in which your team or you take stock. And it could be for anything, whether it's for your code or for your wet lab work or for anything that you do. And sometimes great ideas come across. So the next key takeaway, I think, I took from the program was collaborative upskilling. So when we did that action of sitting down, taking stock of what we have as a team, skills came out of the woodwork. We identified skills amongst our own team members that we could really leverage. And to me, that was such a great moment because I was like, oh, so you know how to do this? Could you show me how? And we'd never really talked about it. And so I felt individual skills often fly under the radar. And for me personally, perhaps for a lot of you, learning from a colleague is often the most productive way to learn because it's very focused and it's in the same area of work that you're doing. So I'm going to give more recent examples from my time in the OCDO about what kind of collaborative upskilling I've been doing. So an application of the skills from the OpenScapes program. So for me, I wanted to manage my work better in this new role and learned about sprint planning. And this was thanks to the project managers at OCDO who are well versed with these kind of mechanisms to improve work efficiency. As a team, I think a great example is a project that we actually work with scientific computing on, is this product that we're building called Proof. If you don't know what it is, please click the link. It's this nifty tool we're building so you can submit complicated bioinformatic workflows through a click of a button. And because this was a cross-functional team, we needed a good way to manage the work. And so we really used the GitHub projects mechanism to make ourselves more efficient in the way we work. And this is definite shout out to the data science and software team at the OCDO. And for the larger world or people who don't know us, this example is centered around CBioPortal. This is an amazing tool that was built by Memorial Sloan Kettering that allows you to do these really easy visualizations of genomics data. And now at Fred Hutch, we host a version of CBioPortal. But we were getting requests from research staff to be able to be onboarded onto CBioPortal so they can put their own data in this secure version of CBioPortal. And so we used REDCap forms as a way to manage these requests. And this was, in fact, leveraging some skills that I had learned during my postdoc on using REDCap. And so this is the way we were able to improve our management of requests from people beyond our team. And so I'd love for hearing from all of you about a skill you may have learned from another team member. And it doesn't have to be just about data or science. It could be learning how to bake better bread as well. The last thing, and I think something that's close to everyone, is reproducibility. I certainly feel if you do it once, you should be able to do it again. And ideally, someone else should also be able to do it. And I think this idea of reproducibility is more than just the action of creating reproducible data workflows or system, but it's a cultural aspect of the work. I think it encourages us to be more organized in how we work. I think the idea of reproducibility also goes beyond the idea of self-organization, but how can this work benefit more than just you? And I think one of the most looked over aspect of reproducibility is the fact that you can creating reproducible systems allows others to reiterate and advance the work. And that is, I think, one of the greatest aspects of being able to create reproducible systems. At the me level, I think I recognized I needed a way to find out if my code actually does what it says. And the idea of doing code reviews was very, very critical. And we have some helpful tips on how to do code reviews, either with a colleague or your team or with someone completely outside. And I think that has been remarkably helpful in improving just my own work processes. As a group, we're very focused at the OCDO in building testing frameworks for our software, and that ensures reproducibility of the toolage that we're building. And encouraging reproducibility beyond just us, I think, takes form in many, many different ways. But I think a good example is documenting contributor guides. So when we're building repositories around particular analyses or under particular methods, creating a space and identifying what is the correct way of contributing allows multiple people to contribute to the same body of work. And we have a WILES contributor guide that if you would like to look at is one way we achieve that. And this is a place where we're trying to build reproducible bioinformatic workflows, reproducible Docker containers, and so on and so forth. And we have really specific guidance around how someone else outside our team can contribute. And I think that's a good example of how you could potentially incorporate reproducibility amongst common workflows. So I'm curious to learn if you would like to share if there's just one thing you could make more reproducible in your own workflows, it would be great. I'm almost on time, so I'm going to quickly go through kind of like my final thoughts. I think it is really, really important, and something I learned through this program was to create the space and talk to each other. The seaside chats that Julie and Steph talked about don't have to stop with this program. In fact, at the OCDO, we do a version called the Lakeside Chats, and that's conscious, collaborative working time with the team. As Katie beautifully mentioned it before, building proactive processes rather than reactive ones. And a lot of people are familiar with this. We need the data yesterday, so we create something and get it going. But this is not sustainable and doesn't help anyone in the long term. I've also learned that there is no such thing as too much documentation. Someone down the line will be thankful that you did. Um, and finally, I think always build systems that someone else can better. It's hard for me to accept, but there's rarely anything that's perfect. But there's so much more beauty when things are built as a team. And so with that, I would like to thank all of you and look forward to discussing if anything resonated with all of you in this presentation. Thanks.